Welcome back. And our conversation this morning is actually a lead up to a big conference taking place on Thursday. We're talking Women in Politics. It is the program coming out of the National Women's Commission, and they have actually partnered with the U.S. Embassy for this particular conference to bring in a very special speaker. And with us this morning, we're joined by Anne-Marie Williams, who's the Executive Director for the National Women's Commission. We have the highlighted international speaker, Professor Kelly Dittmar, and we have the U.S. Chargé d'Affaires, Adrienne Galanek. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, and thanks for having us.
Yes. Bright and early on a Monday morning, right?
Right, start the week right.
Okay, so we're going to really obviously try to look at some of the issues. And I know, Anne-Marie, we talk about this very often, women in politics in Belize. What Professor Dittmar is able to bring to us today is kind of the international perspective and just how different Belize is, or the same, as the rest of the world. But before we get into that, let's just talk about the conference and its aims.
Well, this long-awaited conference takes place on Thursday, the 31st of August. We're looking at the conference prior to the 2018 City Council municipal elections. This conference is a booster for the political aspirants running for women leaders, women in decision-making, women who might want to stand for elections one day, or women who just want to lead in their particular area, whether at work, in political parties, because women in decision-making happens to be one of the priority areas of the national gender policy and one of the areas that Belize prioritized following the Beijing conference. And so 22 years later, it still remains relevant.
That's right.
The conference actually will provide a role modeling effect for women who want to enter politics. Why I said that? Because if we don't see women, women become invisible. We can't imagine they can lead, they can stand in any particular place if we don't see them. A particular example, and this is a true story. When Gro Brundtland became the first Prime Minister of Norway, this school was out doing their recess and it was time to gather back for school. And little boy was fidgeting and giving a little bit of trouble, and the teacher said, straighten up, straighten up, straighten up. One day you need to be the Prime Minister. You have to model behavior now. And the little girl looked back and said, you can't be the Prime Minister. Gro Brundtland is the Prime Minister today. And so I said that because when you see things, you tend to figure you can be there.
Yes.
And so the Women in Politics Project has produced little successes, but we're capitalizing on that success on Thursday.
Yeah.
So we will see presentations from Tracy Tager-Panton. She's one of two women actually elected at the national level. She is a graduate of the Women in Politics Project. We see Fern Gutierrez, the mayor of Punta Gorda Town. She's a graduate of the first cohort of Women in Politics. And Ert Lopez, who is also a graduate. She's the deputy mayor of Dangriga. And we will have them making presentations. It's an opportunity for women in the room to meet them, to network, to hear from them. What is it like on a typical day? What are some of the issues you face? What are some of the challenges? And where are the opportunities for us? And so that is part of what the conference will be. The main speaker at the conference, sitting to my immediate left, will be telling us about some of the stereotypes and strategies that we can look at in politics and in leadership as we go forward. So it's an opportunity for you to come, be in a room with over 200 powerful women, meet them, hear from them, cement your opportunities, and figure what you can do in this grand scheme of things to help us to raise a critical mass of women.
Now, Kelly, if I may, what are some of the gender stereotypes insofar as women in politics? Because from a male's perspective, and you'll forgive me for asking, oftentimes when we look at politics, we look at politics as, you know, a male-dominated area. Can you speak to us of some of these stereotypes that women face as either politicians or as aspiring politicians?
Yeah. Well, I think you raise an important point. Oftentimes I talk about stereotypes in politics in two ways, right? To say, we all hold stereotypes of what it means to be an elected leader or a candidate, right? You think, what comes to your mind when you think of a candidate? And typically it's a man. And we all have stereotypes and expectations of what we think of as what a woman is. What is she supposed to act like? What expertise does she bring? What sort of character traits should she present to the world? For men, those two things, stereotypes of gender and being a leader, overlap, right? They're complementary. You're tough, you're strong, you have expertise in security or the economy or things like that. For women, those two sets of stereotypes often conflict, right? And we call that a double bind, or we talk about the ways in which roles are incongruous with each other, right? And that leads to these more specific stereotypical challenges for women running for office. They have to figure out how to both present themselves in a way that the public is comfortable with, but also in ways that meet the expectations of a leader. So things like looking for the advantages that women might bring. For example, women are still often seen as more honest and ethical than men. That's an advantage, that's a stereotypical advantage they may talk about. But on the flip side, if their credentials are questioned, right? Are you qualified enough? Do you know enough? Are you competent enough? Those are stereotypes that work to women's disadvantage. How do you deal with that? So some ways are getting other people to validate you. Some ways are talking a lot about your experience. So these sorts of, that disjuncture between stereotypes of gender, stereotypes of candidacy, are where strategists and where a conference like this can really hone in and say, here's how you handle that, so that folks don't discount you and your ability to be a leader.
Yeah. Now, Kelly, obviously it's wonderful to have you in Belize following the experience of the presidential campaign of Hillary Clinton. And I think all of Belize, maybe you don't know this, but all of Belize was watching. And
the world was.
Yeah, the world was. But just in case you didn't know.
Yeah, she knows.
But I think it's important because we finally saw the discussion within the U.S. about the difference in how coverage, not just from the media, but just in terms of how people are measuring her performance as a woman versus that of a man. And it had the added benefit of a qualified person versus a non-qualified person.
Right.
How will you use that experience, especially since it's so fresh for people, when you come into the conference, to kind of draw parallels or use it as a learning experience?
So I think one of the key points there is to remind people that I think there was an assumption in the US at least, and maybe throughout the world, that the US was so progressive and that women were doing so well. And we saw women in leadership, and we saw the Hillary Clintons or our former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. You saw these prominent women. We knew at my center that women weren't doing that well in politics. We were under 25% in representation at all levels of office, and we knew that it was going to be an uphill climb for a woman to win the presidency, because the presidency is the most masculine office, right? And what the election, I think, message-wise showed us is that progress is not inevitable. So you can have women increase their numbers, and we can get women inspired at this conference, but they're going to have to continue to work. It doesn't just happen. And so those barriers that women face are going to keep hitting them until we get to a point of much greater parity. So for Hillary Clinton, we saw those quite visibly, but I would argue we actually saw the sort of gender dynamics of the race almost more explicitly from President Trump or candidate Trump, who continually presented himself as the most masculine candidate, right? I'm the toughest, I'm the strongest. And he reinforced all these stereotypes that work to women's disadvantage because they're not seen in that way. So I think it's a reminder to everybody that the work continues, that the US is by far not immune to these gender dynamics, and that we can sort of have a lesson in the US that we all need to be a bit more diligent.
Let me get Adrienne into the conversation. Obviously, this partnership allows for you to be able to share in the experience and meet some of the potential candidates in the future, but talk about why it was important for the embassy to get on board.
Well, it's really important because women cross-cut all of the different partnership goals that we have with Belize. As you know, we work in partnership with the government and people of Belize in citizen security, in economic prosperity, and governance. And across the board, you can't have any of those if you don't have full participation of women. So working in the citizen security sector, increasing women's participation in law enforcement, as well as in the military forces here in the BDF and the Coast Guard. Economic prosperity, very key for women to be entrepreneurs. Many are. Many fuel a lot of the market activities. And women are taking increasingly leadership roles as well in companies and businesses here. We promote youth as well, both boys and girls, to become leaders. So in the governance pillar, it's very important. Youth ambassadors we send to the United States in high school. They go for several weeks and come back and have to participate in community activities, and also in getting young girls interested in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and now they call it STEAM, arts and math. The importance of increasing gender parity in those areas as well are really important, and of course combating gender-based violence, and then also of course women's participation in politics. So this program is a natural fit for all of the things that we do in partnership, in particular with the Women's Commission and the Special Envoy for Women and Children as well.
Now, my question has to do, and if we look at the photo that is up right now, there are quite a number of prominent women or well-known women within that photo. And so I think that we can safely say there has been a bit more visibility of women in leadership. But my question to you is, the numbers don't necessarily change the challenges. And are we equipping? So we inspire women to want to step forward, but are we equipping them for what we know will be the challenges? First of all, whether if it's a political office to get the seat, but secondly, that their performance will be measured completely different from perhaps what they're seeing with males in office.
I think sometimes we lay the onus directly at the feet of women. But we really have to examine the systemic issues. And part of the systemic issues have to do with patriarchy. We well know that women, not only in Belize, but the world over for the most part, are not socialized for politics. And politics is a male's boys club. That doesn't mean that women can't break through. But this is why you have entities like the UN Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women that spent a lot of time doing a lot of research on the issues and would actually say that countries need to look at things like temporary special measures to try to level the playing field for women. Not to give women a quota to surpass men or to make it tokenism. A lot of men are token, but it's okay. And if you look at it over the years, the systems are not geared toward women. They're not as friendly. Look at our first past the post system that we have at the national level. We don't have a full proportional representation at the municipal level, but it's easier because like last night I was counting votes at the UDP convention. And had the political parties agreed, I see where we could have had 5 men and 5 women and any amount of people running for the mayor. And so I'm saying that to say that there has to be an agreement, because whatever we're doing now, we're not doing something that is sustainable. So over time, you would have 5 women on the slate for the UDP and maybe 4 women on the slate for the PUP. And there are huge slippages over the years. So how do we maintain that level? And that's why it's called temporary special measures.
Oftentimes what we see to counter that are the appointments of women following the election.
But the appointments are not done. Let me show you. In 2012, you had Senator Joy Grant, you had Lisel Alamia. That's 2012. Okay. In 2015, they're gone. So you have 2 women elected. we could have had 2 appointments and 2 women elected, would have been 4. And this is why I'm saying the appointments are just fleeting. If something is put in place to say this is what we will do for 15 years, let's say for 3 election cycles, then we build up an amount, we raise the critical mass, and then we could hold off on whatever we're doing and let it flow. But you have to put something in place, because when somebody is appointed, your term is fleeting. And so it doesn't help women per se.
And can I just add, so I think sometimes we get into these conversations about numbers because we think we're doing a favor to women, right? Like, oh, well, we need these temporary special measures just to let women in. I think another important point is to make a case, a sustained case about why women should be at the table in political discussions, to political debates and leadership. So there are sort of 3 main reasons. One is for democratic legitimacy, if we think that this is a representative government in any way. Number 2 is the symbolic reasons. We're going to cyclically always see fewer women in office if women can't see themselves in leadership. And then 3rd is the substantive reasons. We know that conversations are different at this table and at government tables when women's perspectives are there. That's in part because women don't live the same lives as men in this country or in any countries throughout the world. And so we also have to sort of recognize that value and have party leaders and those in power recognize that they are missing out on half of the talent pool if they aren't finding ways to structurally and culturally integrate women into leadership positions.
Let me ask this question, Anne-Marie. We have 2 major political parties in Belize. And I'm assuming that both of these parties have women's groups. Shouldn't there be more of an effort from the women's group to lobby to have that kind of a representation whenever candidates are offering themselves?
I agree with you, but it's not just the women's group. Okay, let me show you something.
It should start somewhere.
But let me show you something.
Maybe from the party leaders.
Let me show you something, right? We do environmental lobby and we make noise about the environment, and rightly so. I remember in 2008 at the last election, I was at Channel 5 and Janelle did a story on both parties going up for elections. And the UDP had no women. I was one of the person who was interviewed. And my first comment was, where is the outrage from community? Where is the outrage? And this is why I'm saying sometimes we lay things squarely at the feet of women or at the feet of the political parties only, but we all have a role to play. Because in this process, we have 50% women, 50% men. It's like half and half. If you are telling me that it's important to leave 50% of your population behind, then it's not very democratic. It's like a bird with 2 wings. You injure one wing, and then it can't fly so well. So we have to realize that because women bring different frames of reference to the table, we have to be present at the table where decisions are made over and for our lives. But we have to have an educated electorate. I am all for people waging the war and women, we vote for the men. We put them there.
Not we only put down the women.
We work for them. Of course.
Let me jump in there, because I think that's a crucial issue. There are many layers to this issue, and there are many different groups that need to be worked with. One is the electorate. Yes. There was no outrage when there are no female participants in the political process. But I want to look at the political parties themselves, because oftentimes we don't look at whether or not internally they restructure to have better participation of women. And I think perhaps going that approach, it's not necessary to have quotas if internally they want fair representation. I've spoken on this issue before, and I know even to you when there's the Women Awards, we don't see the party leaders speaking out on the contributions of women. We see a female minister step forward. We
Yeah.
see the wife of the prime minister step forward, and they are considered the highest official within these particular events. Now, my question is, if we can't even have a male, or if it's a female who's the leader, to say these women have represented us and represented us well, then it shows that we are still segregated within the parties themselves. So my question is, how important is it that the parties have these structures in place, and would that then spin off or encourage the wider public to recognize that it's important?
It is important. We commissioned a publication with UNDP toward equality of opportunity for equality of results. It was in 2012. It can be found on the internet, and I know you found
very
it
good.
useful.
Yeah.
It's very useful.
Was written by Deborah Lewis, and that particularly at that time, our Minister of Education now and Deputy Party Leader Patrick Farber was part of the advisory commission of that. He was a party chairman at the time. And he was all for, let's see what we can do. We don't have to call it quotas. But if you have a problem with the name, it matters not.
Yeah.
Let's look at the process. And that's where we started the conversation, because he had an in-depth opportunity to see where the political parties are not regulated. The political parties are like a law unto themselves. And yes, there are some structures in place, but a lot of the structures sometimes go like the movement of a goalpost. And he was willing to say, let us sit and let us see what we can do. But a lot of those conversations sometimes just lie there and die there. And so Thursday is an opportunity to seriously look at, we will have recommendations coming out of the conference. What is it that may be triggered by the Women in Politics project that we can do for women? Where do we want to take this movement per se? Because it should be for the long haul.
And I think that when you talk about, and this is the same in the U.S. with parties. I mean, we have the same problem, particularly in my home state of New Jersey, where parties are very strong. They decide who's running, and they play an influential role. So we need them to buy in. But how do you incentivize parties and party leaders to do what you're asking?
Yeah.
And that's always a challenge, because if there's no formal rule, how do you incentivize them? Well, the other ways you incentivize them is by mobilizing voters, right? And making sure that voters, going back to the responsibility of voters to say, this isn't right. We're not supporting you if you don't support more women. And also financially, in whatever ways that the party needs resources, can you intervene in that way? Those are some strategies, right? But you have to find ways to incentivize the party if fairness, equality, and democratic legitimacy alone are not going to get them to the point of prioritizing women's leadership.
From a societal point of view, and I look at Belize as the primary example here, there's been a shift, or there is a shift that is currently taking place with regards to more women becoming more educated and more empowered in other areas. But there seems to be that sort of like a shortfall when it comes to politics. Is it that the culture of the way we look at politics and politicians is yet to change in that regard, to sort of meet that transition that women are more in the forefront now in terms of education and other areas of society?
Well, it's that and a lot of other things, because like my CEO, Judith Pucha, reminds me every time that if we were doing this kind of work 20 years ago, this is like foundation. If we could have done it for such a short time and we have this small success now, it could have been magnified over 20 years. And so there is hope. That's real hope. But in June, 61% of the graduates at UB happened to be women over the male counterparts. And that has been steady for even before it was UB. And so we know that things will change. This is just, the wheels of justice grind slowly. This is just the most painstaking part of the justice. But yes, it's part culture. It's also part how we raise our girls. we cannot wait until a woman is 30, 35 to have
To introduce
to
her
talk to them
politics.
about
Now
politics.
you should run for
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's too late.
we cannot wait, and it starts in the home. It starts with having women and men and the extended family validating girls.
Yes.
That is institutionalized in school if it's done well at home. You go to school, there are clubs, there are student government, these things you have in churches. So there are lots of organizations along the way that play a pivotal role in the development of girls. And if you expose your child early on to these things, it helps, because politics done well is the right kind of leadership.
And I think we have to expose boys to women's leadership as well. So one of the projects we've done at our center in the United States is called Teach a Girl to Lead, but the idea is that it makes women's public leadership visible to the next generation of boys and girls, for the point that once they get to adulthood, boys, men, who may be in those positions of power need to also recognize the value of women's leadership.
Yes.
So if you are the party leader, you need to know that that is a normal, appropriate role for women to play as well. So we do sort of books and fictional media that prioritize women's leaders, as well as make sure that they see and hear women's leaders in their
What I look at,
That's
yeah.
But I think it's also important for women to get out of thinking that, oh, I can only run for politics if I've been brought up in the political
Yeah.
system.
That's right.
If you're an educator, if you're a business leader, if you are a leader in your community, think about politics. Think about it at the community level. Think about it at the national level. Really think about going outside of your area of expertise as you see it, because you are bringing that diverse perspective. And one of the things that I learned at the Navy War College was diversity on any team. So the military looks at an agile,
That's a
flexible
strong team.
force, needs to be flexible, needs to be diverse. The NFL looked at diversity. Head coaches, there was a rule that head coaches needed to, for any open position for head coaches, a diversity candidate had to be interviewed. The State Department is doing the same under Secretary Tillerson for ambassador positions, and a third of our ambassadors are women. But you need to think that way. You need to think diversity makes you stronger, and it reflects your society.
You know, and I think that takes us back to the first point that you made, Kelly, looking at how we're socialized as women and what it requires in particular leadership posts, because it extends beyond politics as well. And that's my question to you. How do you work with women, and what do you say to women about, it almost feels at times that you're abandoning what the perception of femininity is to be able to take up a leadership role. It's one or the other. It's not the case, but we feel that way at times. And it does start from socialization, but how do you help to empower women to reach that point to say you are still a very feminine woman if you assume a leadership role within any particular capacity?
Yeah, and I think it's true. It's across sectors. But I think one thing we have to talk about is not only adapting to the rules of the game, right? So we talked about the sort of rules of the game of like, you have to be like the other guys who are there. So sure, there's part of that. And we'll talk about at the conference sort of the strategies. How much are you willing to adapt? But also, where can you push the boundaries? And that's where women in politics do make real systemic, long-term change that opens the door to a lot of other women or different candidates. So women can present the parts of themselves that are maybe unique to politics. And there they disrupt the stereotypes of what it looks like to be a candidate, or how you behave, or what character traits are valued. So they should sort of embrace that part of, I can actually change things, instead of fully saying, oh, well, I just have to be like the guys. They don't have to be. We've seen women be quite successful in presenting themselves. And sometimes that distinguishes them in a way that's very beneficial politically. And so valuing that, but finding strategically where are the ways you can do that, and where are the ways that you are going to get pushback, and how do you deal with that?
And let's not lose the opportunity to talk to the wider public as well in terms of what we do within the homes and how we ensure that 20 years from now we're not at the exact same place in this conversation. So What do we need to do with our girls and boys? And you mentioned a program that you're talking about. I love the encouragement of girls in leadership and, you know, ban the word bossy movement.
Yeah, right.
Which I've been talking about on my own. But let's talk about what we need to do with our girls and boys.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I think one of those things is making women's public leadership visible. So we need to tell boys and girls the history of women's leadership that is often unspoken in schools. It's often out of textbooks. It's often sort of marginalized if it's not these positions of top levels of power.
Yeah.
So showing them what a women leader looks like, what women's leadership looks like, changes their ideas, and making sure that they sort of see themselves in those roles. So that's one way.
I am forever for a confident child. If you raise confident girls and you raise confident boys, then he grows up to respect what she has become, what she is becoming. She, in return, it's almost a natural for her to respect him, but we want it both ways. We want for each other to be respectful of each other's position. The boy is not better than the girl, and the girl must not suffer at the expense of the boys, and vice versa. But for parents to take and to make a conscious effort to let their children know there are no girl jobs and there are no boy jobs, and teachers also, because teachers are parents, and you go to school and it's like this revolving door, and sometimes you wonder, the teachers are the change agent. We need to have our people, men and women in leadership role, to act a part. A lot of times when women are called upon to do something, I remember this guy told me just yesterday, calling this woman to do something, and she said, I don't know if I want to do it. And he said, you see the thing in there, woman? And I'm like, no. But this is it. Stand. Rise to the occasion. Let's do it and do it well.
All right, great. And once again, the conference takes place on Thursday.
Before Thursday, though. Yes. We have a public forum on Wednesday that we're inviting the public. And we want to look at the gender dimensions of patriarchy and its effects in nation building. And Kelly is the speaker. It's at 5:30 at the Best Western Biltmore, and the Biltmore has partnered with us to provide the space. And so we want everybody to come out. It's 5:30 until about 7:45. But it's the kinds of discussions that you and I often talk about and we don't have. And so it's particularly important for our tertiary level students. We know we don't have gender programs in school. We don't have these kinds of opportunities to speak about these things. So we want them to come out. It's free. It's 5:30. It's Wednesday. And it's at the Biltmore.
And then,
and in addition to the conference, Kelly will also be in Belmopan today. She'll be doing a roundtable at the embassy, and then also at the University of Belize. There'll be a public forum, as well as Punta Gorda tomorrow. She's heading down there to UB as well for another public forum. And then on Friday, she'll be out in San Ignacio as well.
You're doing a full tour.
Kelly will be doing everything. So we want everybody to make use of these opportunities, because these opportunities don't often come by.
Absolutely.
And I really want to publicly thank Adrienne. I know maybe she must have gotten tired of me. No, because we were having this conversation a long time ago to bring somebody to do this conference and everything. And then Natella came up and she backed up the whole situation, and then there's Cara. So I really want to take my hat off to the U.S. Embassy for all they've done to assist the Commission in reaching where we are today.
All right. And Marie, thank you for everything that you do as well with the Commission, and also thanks to the Special Envoy's Office for all the promotion.
And we want to thank you all for coming in for the conversation. Of course, this is only a tidbit of what you can expect at the conference on Thursday. Is there still space available?
Few, I'm not sure.
Okay, call today.
But they could call the office at 227-4284. Most people know how to get to me, so they can get to me. But it's a wonderful opportunity, Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, and we don't want you to miss it. I know you're coming.
All right, fantastic. So thank you for being here. We have to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll be discussing the health effects of marijuana use, so stay tuned.